2, 1, go!
And we're off. It's the Sheffield Mutual Sheffield Half Marathon 2025. Good luck to all of you. And we'll be here when you get back. Good luck, everybody.
This is my race summary of the Sheffield Half Marathon, which was on the 23rd of March. This obviously is a half marathon, but it's a kind of unique one in the fact that the first 8 to 9 kilometres are pretty much all uphill, and you gain about 1,000 feet of elevation. This is roughly equivalent to the height of the Eiffel Tower, apparently. And then in the back half of the marathon is nearly all downhill with a few kind of small uphills and then a few flats as well. So going into this event, I actually really didn't know kind of what time I would be able to achieve. I've kind of never really done an event with this much hills. Last year I did a half marathon which would have had about 2/3 of this elevation, and I think I ran a 1:22ish in that half marathon. So yeah, I was kind of just roughly kind of going to compare it to that time and see how I got on. So you'll see from the start here I'm kind of having to overtake a lot of people. I didn't really get the best kind of start position. It was a bit of a weird one. There was sort of one main street that I found that went towards the start of it, and there might have been others, but this is the one that I found. And from there it was kind of a tight squeeze and to move up through the crowds. So it was actually quite difficult to kind of move past at one point I thought I'd be starting off in a 1:45 wave, knowing that I'd be running much faster, but yeah, kind of eventually managed to squeeze through the small gaps in the crowds, and kind of started a little bit ahead of the 1:30 pacer, so I knew I'd be kind of maybe in the mix of some people that are faster and some people that are slower, so I didn't fully know, but just had to take it as it comes, try to settle into a kind of an effort level I was happy with early on, and then just I suppose when the gaps appeared to move around people to do that. So if you've maybe watched any of my past kind of event videos, one thing that I like to do in events is to change my watch. So I deal in kilometers, but rather than kind of having a notification every kilometer that I cover, I'll split it up. So on a marathon it's usually over 5 kilometers. For a half marathon I set my watch to only notify me every 3 kilometers, and that'll let me see the average pace over those 3 kilometers. That kind of applies even more so in an event with hills. So rather than kind of worrying that 1 kilometer maybe down at like a 4:30 pace, you know, I don't have to worry so much. I can just kind of average it out over the 3 kilometers to get a better idea of kind of the overall pace that I'm running. So the first kilometer I think kind of was pretty much flat, a few kind of little tiny ups and downs, but for the most part just flat. But the second and third kilometer you're climbing 30 meters, so you know that's pretty much like a tenth of what you're going to be climbing this whole race nearly. So that's in the course of 2 kilometers. So yeah, it just wouldn't make sense to go kilometer by kilometer. It's much easier just spread it out kind of over time, and then you don't panic too much about if you're going too hot or too cold. So going back to that point about doing the 3 kilometer splits, I'm going to break down this kind of race in 3 kilometer splits, and then I'll tell you what the individuals of each of those 3 kilometers is. So the first 3k obviously I haven't reached at this point in the video, but just for the sake of the footage that I have, I'm going to kind of break it down through different clips. The first 3 kilometers an average of 3:51 pace, which I was kind of happy enough with. Obviously went out a little bit slow in the crowd, and then you know there is that little bit of gains that I'm making in terms of climbs, which you'll kind of see as this clip goes on. So that was a 3:47 for the first kilometer, 3:52 and then 3:55 as we begin to climb. So I was happy enough with this. I didn't, like I said earlier, wasn't fully sure how to gauge the pace that I'd be going at, so I was mostly going off effort feel, so I wanted it to feel like a half marathon effort, which is just something that you kind of gain by experience, but it's something that, yeah, I felt I'd be able to then maintain the whole way through rather than burning myself out early on the hills. So in these clips you're kind of seeing the beginning of the hills as we begin to leave the city. Really good crowd support all the way up these hills. You can see a lot of people out kind of clapping, cheering, making noise. It's really good. I have to say, throughout the whole course the crowd support is really good. But yeah, particularly on these hills, obviously really good to have people kind of pushing you on and encouraging the whole time. So yeah, I thought that was a really good kind of aspect of it. You see now that we're beginning to get into the proper hill. There's way more people obviously have intentionally gone there, so yeah, fair play to all them people. So from this point it's a near continuous climb, pretty much up until the 8 kilometer mark or so. Kind of just, I think about 8.5 kilometers was when it kind of flattened out and began to work downhill again. Going up these kind of hills in the next couple of kilometers, each kilometer was like 50 meters climbing, so that's, you know, an awful lot, quite steep, and just obviously continuous. So it was putting a bit of kind of stress on the joints and tendons and stuff. My left Achilles kind of got really tight going uphill this whole time. I was debating whether I'd have to slow down or yeah, what I might have to do. I was kind of just determined to just push on, see if I could kind of last it out, get to the downhill, and then just hope that it might just go away. So I'm feeling the effects of it today, but I'm happy to say that, yeah, it kind of went away as I was going downhill. So yeah, I just pushed through that. So for the second 3k split, so this is kilometers 4 to 6, my average pace for this block was 4:15 per kilometer. So this one took me, this 3 kilometer segment took me kind of 1 minute and 13 seconds longer than the first 3 kilometer segment. So that shows you kind of the impact that these hills were having. The individual splits for those kilometers were 4:16, 4:24 and then 4:06. So the first 2 kilometers, each one, there's kind of over 50 meters of elevation gain, and the last one there's 24 meters. So it did kind of flatten out a little bit. But yeah, this was quite a tough section. It's obviously the beginning of the kind of real climbing, and you're making your way out into the countryside. So the crowd support obviously really good in this clip, but I think these bits were a bit further on. Still very good crowd support considering you're out in the country, but obviously just not as much as would be in the city centre. So yeah, this was a tough segment, but you know, kind of just again focusing entirely on the effort. I found myself passing a lot of people, but I was trying to get it in my mind that that wasn't my intention. My focus was purely on kind of my own effort level, and sustaining that effort level even when, you know, the hills were getting steeper or less steep. Focusing entirely on the effort level meant my pace was kind of adjusting the whole time, but that it was sustainable, which is the most important thing, because if you go out too hot on these hills, you'll kill yourself for later on when you can use the downhills to your advantage. So it's better to save your energy for then. So out into the countryside now, and yeah, as you can see, it was a pretty foggy day. This bit kind of wasn't as bad as the climb from the city, because there's bits where it was kind of a less steep gradient, and also bits where, you know, for 100 or 200 meters you might get a nice flat bit of land really, just to recover your breath a bit. But yeah, in these clips, obviously they're sped up, but you can hear my breathing. It's quite heavy, and you know, the heart rate was well into the 180s at this point, which probably wouldn't really want it to be usually, but yeah, obviously just putting so much effort into going up these hills that it's higher than it usually would be at this point of a race. But yeah, these bits kind of flatten out and then you begin your little climbs again, so they're tough, but they also did give you a little bit of a breather. So yeah, you can see in those clips people are obviously finding it quite difficult at this point, slowing up, or even having to kind of walk sections of it. At this point we've been probably running uphill for nearly half an hour. Like I said, it's kind of the first 8.5-ish kilometers, all uphill nearly. Apart from that first kilometer, wasn't really too much uphill. So yeah, obviously at this point we've been doing it for a long time, so natural that people are kind of struggling and slowing. For this next 3k segment, so this is kilometers 7 to 9 that I'm talking about now, I again averaged 4:15, so actually 1 second, or well, like half a second quicker than my previous 3k stint. So I was pretty consistent the whole way up through these hills, on an average basis, that is. Now that is bearing in mind that the last one of these kilometers would have been done in 3:53, because that was kind of the beginning of the downhills. So obviously the speed picked up there, but for kilometers 7 and 8 I ran 4:25 and 4:28, and these both pretty much had the same elevation, 46 and 47 meters. So again, just constant continuous climbing, and then afterwards you get your reward. That last kilometer downhill, and from then on I knew that there'd be very few kind of climbs or anything for the rest of the race. Another kind of unique factor of this event is they kind of offer a couple of different, I suppose, challenges they call them. So there's the outdoor peaks challenge, they call it, which was from mile 4 up until, I suppose, the top of the peak it must have been. Kind of they timed each individual and gave you a ranking on this and how long it took. So from mile 4 up to the top, it took me 7 minutes and 9 seconds. So I ended up in 76th in this peaks challenge. So I think a lot of people kind of must have run faster up the peaks and maybe faded later in the race, because I finished in a better position in this. But yeah, my whole thing up them peaks, as I said earlier, is just conserving energy and going purely by effort, and save the legs for later. But as you can see, we're now kind of on the descent aspect of things, so went past the 6 mile mark, so probably in this clip now coming close up to the halfway point mark. I can't fully remember what time I crossed halfway in, but it was definitely over 40 minutes, obviously with all the climbing and stuff. And for the beginning of this 3 kilometer segment of downhill, so this would be kilometers 10 to 12, I averaged 3:38 per kilometer, so you can tell this is obviously much quicker. I kind of again was going by effort, so obviously going downhill, the same effort level is going to be much faster than on the flats. The first kilometer was 3:46, and this is a 13 meter elevation drop. Kilometers 11 and 12 were 3:35 and 3:33, so at this point I sort of settled into a bit of a rhythm, and that was a 55 meter elevation descent, and then a 34 meter descent, so similar pace, even though I obviously wasn't going down as far on that final kilometer. But yeah, at this point again it's going by effort, which means that I'm kind of not slowing up too much, but I'm also not going too fast. At least that was the hope of it. I just wanted to see how long I could maintain this. So as you're saying, we're kind of less in the countryside now and kind of more in the outskirts of the city, coming back through like estates and stuff. So the crowd definitely picked up. It was good out in the country relatively, but yeah, people obviously coming out of their houses and stuff was quite good. So this next 3 kilometre segment will have been kilometres 13 to 15. I averaged 3:40 for this, so it took me just under 11 minutes for this 3 kilometre segment. Those splits were 3:34, 3:41 and 3:44, and the elevation descent from now on isn't as steep except for kind of 1 or 2 kilometres. In this case it was 19 metres, 9 metres, and then the 15 kilometre was actually a 3 metre elevation gain, so it was just a flat basically, or whatever ascent was there. But yeah, again, just keeping the effort level where it was. But at this point I kind of had it in my head that it was possible to get a sub 120, which I would have been delighted with. So I basically just began to gun it from here and go as fast as I possibly could. So I was hitting kind of really fast paces, and that's why they're in the low 3:30s here. It was kind of from this point I knew I had to be hitting kind of roughly. I could only partially do the maths in my head, obviously while running, but I knew I had to be roughly somewhere at least near a 3:30, if not faster, at this point every kilometre, in order to kind of look at that sub 120. So I decided to just go for it, and if I blew up, I blew up, but I'd at least tried, kind of thing, rather than I knew I wouldn't have enough of a burst at the end to do it otherwise. So that was the game plan from here. So this clip here is kind of the final kind of really steep descent. I think this was like a 50 meter descent in 1 kilometer at this point. This is the hill that we were kind of coming out at in the beginning of the video, so it's basically a full loop and then back in the same roads that you came out on. So for this 3 kilometer split, this is kilometers 16 to 18. This was an average of 3:29, so I was really pushing the pace here. I think the crowd were really good. I think they saw me kind of sprinting as well, and I kind of got a good response from them as well. But yeah, so my averages for these were a 3:36, 3:33 and then a 3:16 per kilometre. First 2 of those were a 12 metre descent and then 23 metre descent. Then the last one was the 59 metre descent. So obviously they helped me to push these paces. But yeah, I was really pushing up the effort at this point. Even though I was going kind of downhill like this, my heart rate was starting to hit the 180s, which means obviously working quite hard. At this point I really had no idea in my head. I couldn't work out the maths. I just knew that I'd be close to 120. I just had to really keep going with this effort right till the end, and just go as fast as I could. Obviously at this point the crowd support's really good. Everyone that was kind of on the outer is now kind of looking at you coming back in, which is really good. So yeah, I have to say throughout the whole thing the crowd was really good. It was one of the best events I've run in terms of crowd support. So coming in towards the finish now, and my final 3 kilometre split was 3:24 average per kilometre, and then the last little bit, obviously half marathon is just over 21 kilometres, so that was an average of 3:20 per kilometre for that kind of last sprint. So 3:17, 3:25, 3:30, and then 3:16 average were the paces. The first 2 of those kilometres were pretty downhill, the last 2 were flat, so I was really just pushing at a flat out effort. My overall chip time in the end was 1:20 and 11 seconds. So yeah, 11 seconds off sub 1:20. It was a little bit disappointed in that, but overall I was really happy and really enjoyed the actual event itself. Great support. Thought the course was very good as well. Despite the hills, obviously you get them on the way back, and it's a great way to kind of negative split an event. So obviously a really good way to finish. But yeah, gave it everything I had, got as close as I think I could have to that sub 1:20 beforehand, without kind of knowing that I'd be able to hit that speed. So yeah, overall really happy, really enjoyed the event, and I'd recommend it to anyone. So thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, and here's the end.
Thompson on the way, Christopher Bartlett on the way.
And somebody with a very romantic suit on Valentine and somebody with a very romantic surname, Connor Valentine, coming through the finishing line.
Tom Owens has just crossed the line. Sam Smith has just